It's June, and I think this is the third sunny day that we've had since March. I'm here without my usual hostesses because today we have a very special show, and I wanted it to focus on just our guests and not the three of us. We have with us today Rabbi Elias Lieberman and Janet, I don't even know your last name.
Simons Folger.
There you go. And Roger Kugler, Dr. Roger Kugler, as a matter of fact. And the subject of our show today is medical aid in dying. It's a subject that I, for some reason, always been interested in and became more interested in when my 88-year-old mother was dying in a place in Florida and begging to die. And I wasn't even sad. I said, Mom, I get it, but there was nothing that we could really do. It just made me so sad, and it made me upset, obviously, for other people. And then I found out that my favorite rabbi, and I've had several, was very interested in this subject also. Elias, can you tell us how you became interested in this and what you're working on now?
Sure. I've been a rabbi for approximately 35 years, and in my first position as an assistant rabbi, I had an opportunity to serve as a volunteer hospice chaplain. And I had explored hospice ideas, explored the interface between Judaism and hospice, and it opened me up to all kinds of different thoughts about what it means to approach the end of our lives. I had the opportunity to be with people who experienced what I would consider a good death, a peaceful death, as well as people who clearly were struggling at the end of their lives and suffering in ways that I found deeply disturbing. So fast forward a few decades and my arrival on Cape Cod, and I guess about 5 years ago, perhaps, whenever it was, I met these two wonderful people. First, Roger, and learned of his interest and his advocacy for medical aid in dying through an organization for which all of us are volunteers called Compassion and Choices. Mm-hmm. And so as a faith leader, I felt it very important to have a say in this issue.
And we'll talk more about that organization because, in fact, I took a class that was offered at the synagogue in Falmouth and did a lot of work. Okay, I didn't finish the class because I had to go somewhere, but I did all of the work that I was supposed to do in the class. And Roger, so you met Elias, and let's see, you are a doctor.
Right.
Yeah? Well, I just wanted to say
Sure.
that I was impressed you graduated from Georgetown and Cornell Medical School. I mean, that was pretty impressive. And you became interested in this, unfortunately, for not such a great reason.
Well, when I turned 40, we had 6 deaths in our family between my wife and I in a span of 18 months, including my mother and Kathy's father. They both died of really bad deaths. My mother had pancreatic cancer, and Kathy's father had an abdominal sarcoma, which is a soft tissue tumor in his belly, and of course cancer spreads. And after watching them die, I decided that I didn't want to die that way. And so my first thoughts were about me, and that I, as a physician and a primary care physician, would know how to take care of myself at the end of my life. As I matured more, I started to think about justice and social justice. And justice is the ability of two people in similar conditions to get the same outcome. And so if this was something that I wanted, this is something that other people should be able to get as well.
Can I ask you to just repeat that definition of justice? That's interesting.
So justice is the ability of two people in similar circumstances to get the same outcome. So anyway, I started working for it. My whole life, I had wanted to be a doctor, and I practiced medicine in Brockton for most of my career. I'd spent a year in upstate New York as well. But I was always a frontline physician, so I took care of people in the office. I took care of them when they're in the hospital. I'd take care of them in the intensive care units. When they went into hospice, I was a doctor taking care of them at their end of life. So that I really have had a lot of experience with dying people, death, discussions with people, some of whom would be in so much pain from their cancer that they just couldn't take it anymore, and we'd give them something called I would give them something called palliative sedation, which is a morphine drip, so that they would just go to sleep and not wake up again and die in their sleep. And that was something that was what they wanted. It was something that their families knew about and agreed to. It's something that's legal. But it really is something that's not always offered to every person. In fact, it's probably rarely offered even when needed. And it puts the doctor in charge. I believe in autonomy. I'm very libertarian in this regard. I feel that the individual is the one who understands best when their suffering is too much for them. And that's the ultimate decision that people have to make. If their life at the end, when they're dying, is too much for them, then I think that they should have the option, under certain circumstances, to be able to use medical aid in dying. And this is so different from suicide. I've dealt with suicide as a primary care. I've resuscitated people who've shot themselves. I've pumped out stomachs. I've sent people to psychiatrists.
You've seen it all.
I've seen it all. And, medical aid in dying is so different from suicide. It's, it's like, one thing is a group decision. Medical aid in dying, people talk with their families. They talk with 2 different doctors. They talk with a mental health provider before they can get it. Whereas suicide, people do it alone, in the dark. People are shocked when it happens. They're not terminally ill.
And with this, you don't have to be shocked. I guess you could gather your family and friends close by your side if you wanted to.
That's
right?
often the way it happens.
Okay, so I want to ask you, you got involved in this, but then unfortunately you had your own personal reasons.
I have had cancer for 17 years. I've been through every treatment. I continue to be in treatment. It's not that I'm looking to die, but my cancer, which is prostate cancer, has spread to my bones. I've taken care of people who have had this. I have friends who have had this. I have had a patient that I gave palliative sedation to who had the same type of cancer. I know it's very painful at the end. I've seen people who've just broken bones all over their body, and that it's been very hard. So I suspect one never has a crystal ball and know exactly, but odds are I'm going to die. And when I die, before my death, I know that there'll be a good period of suffering, probably several months of it, where I'm really very uncomfortable. And I feel that I should have the option to decide when I can't take it anymore. I have grandchildren, I have a loving family, I don't want to go anywhere.
No, of course.
But I really don't want to have to suffer at the end.
And you don't want your family to suffer either, I would imagine.
I don't want them to have to watch me, screaming in pain or suffering. It's just, but this is really more, unfortunately, I'm going to say this is more about me and my tolerance.
Sure.
Because each of us are different. And I can't necessarily think about my family, if I can't tolerate it anymore. I mean, I know when I've had cancer in my bone before it was treated, that I'd be just sitting there and tears would come to my eyes, even taking medication. And I know that, I will try and treat it, I will try and do what I can, but at some point, the cancer will have the upper hand, and that today will be the best day of the rest of my life, and tomorrow will be worse. And at that point in time, when I decide that it's bad enough, I want the option.
Absolutely.
And I want each of us to have the option, because it's not that part is not just about me.
So do you have the option now?
I believe I do. I'm suing the Commonwealth to determine that. So that's
That's something. What do you mean you're suing the Commonwealth?
so Kligler v. Healy is in front of the courts now. It's a case brought by me and Alan Steinbach, who's a physician also in Falmouth, saying that there is no state law prohibiting medical aid in dying at this time. So that is before the courts. We've had a hearing, and I suspect I'll be dead before we get the results of through the court. It's been a very, very slow process, the way the courts are. And as Judge Ames has said, she's not going to be the final decider of this case. That she'll make her decision, then it'll be going up on appeal, and the appeals will take years. So I suspect that this is something that I will not live to see the end of. I hope I do. Don't get me wrong, but this is something that I do because I believe in it, and someone has to step up to do it in order for the Commonwealth to have the rights that I believe they do have already.
Now, when I spoke to you on the phone, I said I can ask you any question I want, and you said yes.
Yes.
So this is my question. What plans personally have you made at this time to have a peaceful death?
Right now, I am not at the point in time
Right.
where I will, need anything right at this juncture in time. So I have talked with my physicians who support me, and I'll have to see how it is. This is kind of just in time. I don't have a stash of anything. I don't believe in having a gun at home. But there are many, many, many ways for people to die. And as a physician, I know many of them. And so I'll just have to see what happens. I'm hopeful that we will have a law authorized in the Commonwealth by the time we're having a hearing on June 25th at the State House. All three of us are going. We have a large contingent, mainly from the Cape, who are going up over, right now I have a count of 32 people who are going up to the State House. We're in a huge auditorium, 600 seats, so we need to really fill this with supporters.
Fantastic.
To tell the legislators that this is something that we want, that is very important to us, and we believe is our right.
It almost seems ridiculous to have to even argue about it or have any kind of discussion. It's you, it's you, it's you. We should be able to do what we want with our own bodies, right?
Well, most of us believe in that. This is one of the few things that's bipartisan. So there are Democratic and Republican co-sponsors on this. Majorities, absolute majorities, well above 50% of Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberals, moderates, whites, blacks, Hispanics, Catholics, Christians, Protestants,
Jews.
The nuns, and the others. All of these believe that this is something we should have. Young people, old people, we all die. It's one thing we have in common, no matter how we
Right.
feel. And we all want this. And the question is why our legislators don't support us.
Exactly.
Your viewers may not be aware that already in this country, 8 jurisdictions,
9.
9 Oregon, Washington, Montana, Vermont, California, Colorado, Hawaii, the District of Columbia, New Jersey, which will go into effect August 1st. All of these states have passed authorized medical aid in dying in one way or another. And that represents well over 21% of the nation's population now have this option should they need it.
And Maine may be joining them within the next couple of days because their House and Senate have passed legislation. It's at their governor's desk. Their governor hasn't come out whether or not she will sign it. However,
fingers are crossed.
Fingers
right?
are crossed. They've had votes in Maine since 2000.
Okay, so Elias also told me that he would like to bring on a woman who had lost her husband to a horrible death, and that's why Janet is here. When Janet and I saw each other, we both realized that we had taken an acting class together. And I think it is especially interesting that you have gone through something so tragic, and I saw you for that 1 hour a week as this happy-go-lucky, oh, she's fun, I wish I got to know her better, and had no idea of your history. But Elias said you would be willing to share your story.
Absolutely. I think it's a tribute and a commitment to my then husband, to carry this on, because he himself would have loved to have gone and testified before the committees. He was too ill at the time in the winter of 2017, but he believes strongly in an individual's right to have these options at the end of their life, and had wished that he had been able to have that option himself. My husband, his first wife, died a very difficult death of ovarian cancer in 1980. And we talked a lot about that. And she died at home with hospice. Again, they did a wonderful job, but they could not give her the peaceful death that she wanted. And in fact, she did make use of the palliative sedation, which was helpful, but it was not the kind of death where she was able to maintain her autonomy and control her pain. She was just able to check out. So Dave and I did talk over the years a lot about the kind of death we wanted, and I think most people would love to die in their sleep, but at the very least we would like a peaceful death. So in January of 2017, when Dave got a diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer and a prognosis of 3 to 4 months to live, his immediate thought was, okay, unlike Roger, we had been hoarding medications over the years, and we thought when the time comes, if he needs it, if the pain gets unbearable, we'll be able to manage somehow to help him have a peaceful death. In fact, I met Roger prior to that and talked to Roger during this period, and he said, it's not that easy, Janet. Don't do something silly or something unmonitored by medical professionals because you don't know the outcome. And I spoke with the people at Compassion and Choices, and they reiterated that and said that it's not as simple as going and taking an overdose of something. So get that idea out of my head.
Oh, okay.
And so we did. And from that point forward, we got involved with hospice and had the support of a number of people. But my husband had a really very, very difficult, painful death that he did not want. And had we had legislation like this available, passed, and that option available to him at the time, he could have chosen to die 5 days before he did. And I can't understand how that could have bothered anybody.
Right.
But he could have made a choice to do it at a time when he was comfortable with the people he loved around him, with music playing, with whatever his choice was.
Absolutely.
And gone peacefully, said his goodbyes. But that wasn't what was available to him. And my husband, in fact, chose about 10 days before he died to stop eating all food, taking all liquid, and any medications other than pain medication, so that he could
That
have
hastened
some,
his death,
yeah,
right.
that was the option he felt was available to him to help hasten and perhaps reduce the suffering that he was going through. And that's not much of an option to give people.
No,
I think.
it isn't.
And
It
it's,
isn't.
I think at the time, I was just overwhelmed with sadness, and with time, that there's a seed of anger underlying a sense of purpose to make this legislation pass, both in Massachusetts and in other states, to make this available to everybody, so that, you know, the definition of justice that Roger just gave us is actually a reality, and that the option that's available to someone in Vermont or California or Oregon is available to people in other states who are equally going through, you know, such similar suffering. About a month and a half into my husband's illness, we decided we wanted to move to Vermont, because Vermont does have
Sure.
medical aid in dying as an option. And we picked out a city. We figured out what it would take for us to get residency. My husband was very ill at that time, and even driving to Hyannis was a bit much for him. We weren't going there. So even though we made that effort, the more difficult effort of getting two physicians in Vermont to then certify him as terminally ill and competent to make this decision was a burden that was something that he couldn't handle. I could handle the footwork, but just the traveling to Vermont
Sure.
and getting reset up, he was already in such excruciating pain that didn't appear to be a viable option. But had we even considered it earlier in the game, perhaps we would have done that. You know, it's not, I mean, other people have done that in this country, moved to jurisdictions where it's available to them, and people shouldn't have to do that. You know, why not to be able to be in their home, surrounded by people they love, instead of moving to a jurisdiction that understands the importance and justice of that.
Betsy, can I pick up on a
Yeah.
one point
of
that
course.
Janet raised, and that is, it's hard for those of us who support this option to understand fully why others would deny you or me the most fundamental of decisions if we're facing a terminal illness. And I think, you know, we have to acknowledge that part of it is faith-based. There are certainly many people in this country who believe, because of what they've been taught, or come to believe that this is a decision that only God can control when our lives end. I respect the fact that people believe that. I don't share that belief fully. But regardless of what I believe or don't believe, I think that fundamentally as a society, we have to acknowledge the reality that there are people who are believers and non-believers, and people who may be doubters, or everything on the spectrum. And it seems to me to be just bad social policy to say that my belief should deny someone else a fundamental option to avoid the kind of suffering that we're talking about.
Roger?
And there are people who believe in God, that they have the right to decide when they've had enough of life and to be able to die. So it's not just believer and non-believer.
Oh,
as-
right, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this organization, Compassion and Choices, because from what I've learned, it sounds like this is a helpful way to ensure that you get what you want.
Just as a sort of precursor to this, that Compassion and Choices has done an enormous amount of research, and there's a lot of research out there. And one of the things they've found across the country in jurisdictions where there's more than 40 years of experience with this, that the number of people who actually take the medication that is available to them, who make that option, is relatively small. But the larger benefit of opening up the discussion between individuals and their families, their physicians, and hospice is enormous, and many more people are taking advantage of hospice care. We've gotten much better at managing pain at the end of life with people. So there are side benefits to this legislation that a lot of people don't understand. We are dealing with difficult deaths in many ways that benefit people, aside from just allowing people that very important choice at the end of life to choose to have an option that allows them to decide when and how they're
And I was reading an article about Brittany Maynard, the 29-year-old girl who was able to make the decision to end her life. And she said that when she got her medication, she didn't want to swallow it right that minute, but she felt so much better just having it. And that really resonated with me.
It resonates with me too, because my husband's death that whole journey was very personal and very inward. He was a guy who just loved life, and we all say this, and Roger, and I do too, but I mean, he was vibrant. He did lots of things. He was physically active. He was a voracious reader. He was a lover of music. He loved to tell stories and jokes, and even through those last 3 months, he would go out onto the bike path in a wheelchair with his binoculars to go birding. So he crammed as much as he could in. He did not want to die either, but having that ability or that prescription there, I think would have taken a lot of the end-of-life anxiety out of that whole dying process. And I don't know whether he would have taken the medication or not. It was his choice.
Right, sure.
But it was a very anxious and difficult period for him. And there were a lot of periods of crying out, help me end this. And perhaps if he'd had that comfort of knowing that he could take that medication, would have given him much more comfort and peace at the end.
So I just want to say a couple of things, and
Yeah.
pardon me for
No, I'm
butting in,
glad you are.
but he had everything done for him. Not only did he have hospice, he had palliative care working with him, he had an implantable pain pump, and he, like 26% of people who die in this country, die with uncontrolled pain. So this isn't an uncommon story at all. And he was fortunate. He was able to die at home, which is where most of us want to die. However, there's only one state in the country where more people die at home than die in the hospital, and that's Oregon. And it's not a coincidence. They have the best use of hospice of anyone since they've passed the legislation. They've doubled the use of hospice, and if you look at studies showing who uses hospice appropriately, no surprise, Oregon's in a class by itself. And I want the Mass Medical Society to be working to improve the end-of-life care here. I feel that medical aid in dying will assist in this and will help people to have better deaths, to make better medical decisions. Compassion and Choices works with people to help them to make decisions as to what appropriate care is for them. Of course, the individual makes that decision, but they will talk with people and help them to decide when it's better to get less treatment. Hospice care extends life expectancy more than usual medical care by 5 weeks. So at the end, instead of getting another round of chemo to try and live longer, if people went on hospice, they'd have better quality of life and a longer life expectancy.
So Compassion and Choices has this booklet online that you can download. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Compassion and Choices is an organization which has been around for quite a while, for decades, and promotes the full range of end-of-life options and choices in those jurisdictions which now authorize medical aid in dying. That is one of them, but the full range. And therefore, we certainly encourage anyone to go online, compassionandchoices.org. There's a wealth of information. You can learn how to be active, if you so choose, in the fight to bring medical aid in dying to your jurisdiction. We certainly would want everyone watching this show to come away feeling empowered to have these conversations with the people closest to them, with their physicians. We should
And
be
it is
talking about these
amazing how
issues.
people don't want to talk
Absolutely.
about the end of their life.
Physicians also don't want to, so it's not like it's just the people, but most physicians don't want to talk about end-of-life issues. I was talking with someone the other day, and she started to bring it up to her physician, and the physician just really cut her off.
Like I
About
cut
it.
off Elias, you mean? Sorry.
Not remotely comparable.
Well, I know we only have 2 more minutes, so I
Oh.
just want to make sure that we get everything in because it's such an important situation. I was reading about compassion and choices today, and I thought, when I get home from this, I have to make a donation. I mean, I think everybody should be making donations.
I'm going to turn to my friend and my hero, Roger.
Yeah.
Would you tell the viewers about what they can do right now in Massachusetts?
Yeah.
Right.
So right now, the things that can be done, first of all, we're having a hearing at the State House, and I recognize that everyone can't necessarily get there, but it's on the 25th of June. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but it's between 11 and 5, and for people who are supporters to come up there and just with their bodies show the legislature that this is enough of an issue that they're going to come up from the Cape. We are having a carpool from here. We've got over 30 people who
that's
are
great.
coming already, but it's a 600-room auditorium, and there'll be people coming from all over the states.
Should we go?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Join Compassion and Choices. It's very easy, it's free. But like many things, this campaign costs money. We had an initiative here, and it went down to defeat, and it was really an economic thing because most of the people in the state, when surveyed, wanted it to pass, but they had disinformational
Okay.
campaigns.
Anything else? Money?
One
bodies?
crucial piece.
Yeah.
Call your state senator, your state representative, and if you support this, tell them you want them to support the End of Life Options Act.
Okay, I'm
Crucial.
putting that on my Facebook page
And
today.
calling is important. It's better than emailing. They
It
love
is,
the phone
okay.
calls. They sit there, they pick them up, they make a record of it. I've sat in representatives' offices
You
and
talk
watched
to a
the
real
calls.
person?
You do.
you
You
call?
talk to, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And friends of mine have said, "Oh man, I got into a great conversation, with his aide," and so calling matters. They
Uh-huh,
notice
okay.
that. They
That's-
notice that.
More
That's
than
great.
email.
Yeah.
More than email. After a while, you just delete all those emails.
And it doesn't take a lot of time.
Not at all. We have to close because, as we were talking about, in this day and age, people have only a small amount of attention thanks to screens, etc. So we want to make sure that people have watched the whole show. And I thank you, Roger, very much. And Janet, I don't know how you even get through this without crying because I will be shortly. I admire you so much. And you are always here and always part of any social justice action on Cape Cod, which is why yesterday someone called me and said, I was just at a funeral and your rabbi did the eulogy and it was so special. I'm going to join that synagogue. So I thought that was pretty cool.
We'll get you the finder's fee.
Oh, good. Thank heavens. Okay, and thank you for watching. We're going to be back in July with a really cool segment about healthful eating and children's literature. We'll see you then.